Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
And a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human.
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture.
And what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley.
What's up?
Not much. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, what's next on the docket?
So we have, coming up next is Patrick Hill. He is an associate professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Washington University in St. Louis. So in our backyard. And his current research really is about examining how sense of purpose might promote coping with stressors, as well as engaging in health-promoting behaviors, among other things. So he also is, looking a lot about how personality type plays in daily and long-term cognitive resilience. He also studies forgiveness and the role that plays in our longevity. So I think there's, we're gonna have a lot to talk about with Professor Hill when
Professor Hill.
yeah.
Is he the music man? Do you get that?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Music Man in the musical The Music Man. His name is Professor Hill.
Mm,
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to go watch that. I won't
Go
watch it. No.
You won't watch it. That's okay. But I'm definitely going to make that bad joke. That bad joke when he's here.
He might get the reference.
Well, I hope he does
so.
because I'm sure he's gotten it.
He's gotten it before. Wonder if he knew right off the bat.
Yeah.
Or if he was like, I don't know what you're talking
I don't know
about.
what you're
He got
talking
it in
about.
too many times, and he's like,
He might be a theater kid. He might be an ex-theater kid.
Yeah.
We'll have to
Possible.
find out.
He's looks like an Indiana guy. So at least that's where he did his undergrad and then his master's and PhD at the University of Notre Dame. So
Nice.
I think I'm curious if he grew up there. We will ask
Yeah.
him. We will find out.
We'll find out. Stay tuned.
Yep. So I think we should talk a little bit, we can kind of unpack sort of our, gut reactions, preconceptions about some of the things that he is studying. So thinking about, I think maybe off the top, how sense of purpose can promote coping with stressors and engaging in like healthier living. I think that's kind of interesting.
Say that again. Just say
Okay.
that again to me.
So right now, his research is on how sense of purpose may promote coping with stressors.
Okay.
And
So meaning like if I feel like I'm doing a job, but it has a greater purpose than just the thing that I'm doing, I can have a larger capacity for stress than if I'm just doing a job that like I don't think really means much in the
yeah, I think
in the
well,
greater-
I this is one of the things that I am curious to talk to him about because I'm not sure how much of this is related to your job or not,
Yeah.
right? So and that's a question too, which
Ah.
is like, what are the ways that other people where do you find meaning and purpose outside of work?
Yeah.
And if you are in a job that doesn't necessarily like just inherently say, oh, this is filled with meaning and purpose,
Mhm.
like where do you go? Where
Yeah.
do you go to fill that
Yeah.
that bucket? Or if you maybe are in a job that has meaning and purpose, but you're just like, honestly, it doesn't.
I'm over it.
Yeah, or whatever,
Yeah.
it doesn't for you.
Yeah.
Sort of like, how do you manage that? But I do think like the idea that that you feel like your life has meaning and purpose
Yes.
makes you more resilient to
That your life has
Yeah.
meaning and purpose.
yeah. That's what I
That's
think.
so interesting,
Yeah.
right? So there's a difference between you saying like my job has meaning
Yeah.
and purpose as opposed to my life has meaning and purpose.
Mhm.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
we can end the episode right now. I mean, just go home and think about that, people.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
how many of us actually think about our purpose in terms of our lives? And
Yeah.
how many of us think about our purpose in terms of like what it is we do in
Yeah.
our jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that struck me hard.
Mm.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So, and then the kind of second portion of that was like engaging that I think that people who feel like they have sense of purpose in their lives are more likely to engage in health promoting behaviors,
Mm,
which is that's interesting. I don't know what that means. Like, I want to drill down into a lot of the specifics
yeah.
of the
What is a
of
health promoting behavior?
yeah.
I mean, we can kind of
Yeah, I guess
assume what some
some
of
of
those
those
are.
are, but the fact that that would contribute to that, or
Yeah.
how do they? And the other thing I want to know is, how do they study that? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's questionnaires, but um,
Yeah.
how do you try to look at that?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This is totally, well, I'm not even going to go on that tangent. We'll go on that tangent another time.
Okay.
Data and research and all that.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, the other thing that I think is interesting is he's talking about how your personality dispositions
Yes.
affect your daily and long-term cognitive resilience.
Do you think he knows anything about the Enneagram?
I don't know. Maybe we can ask him.
We can ask him. He'll be like, that's bullshit.
Yeah. So that what he's talking about is related to what they call the Big Five, or psychological trait theory. But it's the five personality traits are extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism.
Yeah.
And you're either like high, low
Yeah. There's
on
ranges
those.
and all those.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then based on those, kind of where you land in each of those, are there just kind of like archetypes, or they don't go into any kind of like
No, it's not like that where you have like a character or a persona.
ENFP
yeah,
or
that's
whatever.
created from that. No, I don't think so. I think that's just like kind of I think that's a standard like test that a lot of psychological researchers use if they're trying to discern like the role that personality plays in like your life. The class that I just finished, it was called The Science of Well-Being, with Lori Santos is the professor, but she was saying, and I can't remember whose research she was referencing. I'd have to go back and look. It was a female scholar. I knew that, but the work was basically saying that like in your life, like how you cope with things, right? It's like 50% is sort of determined by your personality. So it's like 50% is either, I'm a glass half full or I'm a glass half empty kind of person. And like, there's just, there's only so much you can do with, you're kind of have that baked in. And then 10% is the shit that happens to you. And then 40% is like the habits of mind that you cultivate for yourself.
Yeah, I totally buy that.
Yeah.
Not that
it was a cool pie chart.
Yeah, that is a cool pie chart. But that's so interesting that it's only 10%.
The 10% is just like the bad stuff that happens to you. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Because some people allow the 10% to be 90%, right?
Yeah.
And it's only 10%.
Yeah, it's that 40. It's that 40. Well, I mean, it's the whole thing, right? But like, it's actually, when you think about it, it's like that's a lot actually that you get to have some influence over.
Absolutely. But even knowledge. So this is in my Enneagram like works, like typology, personality stuff that I do. The stuff that we're born with, right? This personality kind of archetype that we're like, the idea is that once we're aware that it becomes a confirmation bias for us. So we receive all these kind of messages, right? But the messages that we absorb are the ones that confirm this personality that we are born with.
Yeah.
Then once we can understand that, then we can kind of discern what are the messages that we're going to take and not take. So even that stuff that's nature as opposed to nurture, right? We still have control over that because we can still kind of have an awareness of what we choose to take in.
Yeah. No, it is an awareness and sort of creating the structure for yourself about what you take in and what you don't. I mean, I think in the same way, oh gosh, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like you're in the same in that way, like you have to curate a way to move through the world. I think especially in the environment of information abundance that we live in, and you have an endless stream
Mm-hmm.
that is overwhelming if you desire it to be, of information that could come at you at any time. And like you, it's like I only have so much time and I
Yeah.
only have so much bandwidth. I need to sort of, you know, filter,
Yeah.
and create for me the, environment that is healthy for me to be in.
Yeah. And I mean, and we're talking like, this is easy, but it's really
It's really hard.
it's really hard. But yeah, awareness. And I think we've said the word awareness probably more than any other word in this podcast. Because yeah, that's the key, right? Um, how do we attune ourselves to
Yeah.
um what what's happening?
I
Yeah.
know. And you think what's interesting is also like I mean in the span of human history how new these
Mm-hmm.
this information overload is.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lauren and I were out we went for a run and we had Elaine and we let her out of the stroller and she was running around in the park and I don't know, Lauren was checking her phone. It was some news alert about this. There was this 9-year-old kid that was like abducted and there was a ransom and
Oh
then
yeah.
they like
Right,
whatever.
right.
And I
They
hadn't
found her.
and it was all fine. But I've like really, really, really scaled back how much news
Yeah.
I pay attention to. And I'm like, man, you hear about these stories, and there's always so many stories of like,
Right.
there's endless amounts of like stories that can freak you out. And you're like, if I just didn't have any of this information, I would think the world is the greatest place ever, right? Like,
Right, where you
'cause
are,
my
where you're
ex-
living, because your life's pretty good,
yeah,
right?
my experience is fine. um,
Yeah,
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 I
yeah.
know.
But yeah, and that's the thing is, right? Awareness isn't necessarily about being attuned to CNN 24/7 or Fox News
Yeah,
24/7.
yeah, yeah.
Being aware is going, okay, I know that my tendency is to interpret this information in this specific way.
Yeah.
And I know that. And so I need to make adjustments to how I receive and interpret information so
Mhm.
that I am really having a a full spectrum of experience of what's happening. So I'm not living out of um uh, kind of a broken place where it's just about me and my perception of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really easy for people to get stuck in.
Yeah.
Which I assume that's part of what he's talking about, right? Is
Yeah.
that like when you get stuck in that, it's not good for your coping, your longevity. It probably affects
Mhm.
all different kinds of things. I was listening to he has a podcast also, and I was listening to some of the episodes, but he was talking about how it affects people who feel that they have meaning and purpose in their lives. Just sleep better.
Mm.
Just these like little how it affects different aspects of
Mhm.
your and you'd
That's
almost think for
interesting.
a second you'd be like, well, maybe it would be the opposite because people are like, oh, I have so much to do or I have so much, but
Right.
it's really that because I think maybe it's more about uh like a contentment.
Yeah. That's interesting, right? Yeah. That meaning and purpose and some people confuse meaning and purpose with, and I am all for um the things that we do to help our fellow man and to create space for people who don't have space. 100%. But meaning and purpose isn't always just socially justice focused,
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
right.
That there's meaning and purpose can be found. Like I'm in a class right now. Us in our classes, I'm taking a class in theopoetics. We were having a class the other day and we were talking about Mary Oliver, the poet. And Mary Oliver, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. She's a nature poet. You might call her a nature poet. But one of the things that when we're talking about like contentment as a part of meaning and purpose, right? She is a woman who has basically dedicated her life. She dedicated her life to spending time in the woods, spending time in nature, and observing things so specifically and writing them in these beautiful ways that allows all of us, and because her poetry isn't like so abstract and so like highfalutin,
Yeah.
it's a very democratic poetry, right? So everybody can read Mary Oliver and feel what it feels like to walk in the woods and see a swan in the lake. Everybody can feel it. And some people don't feel that that constitutes good poetry. Um, but what she does is, in this sense of contentment and purpose, is she, and this is the idea of like the community of saints, right? That that there are people who pray for the rest of us.
Yeah.
There are monks, Buddhist monks who sit in silence all day because we have to go to work.
Yeah.
And Mary Oliver is a poet who goes out to the woods and who observes the loon and the owl and writes about them, so that because most of us live in a city
Yeah.
and we can't.
Yeah.
And so that is this beautiful sense of purpose and meaning. And she's not doing anything particularly, in terms of political. She's not doing a political act
Yeah. Yeah.
by the things that she does. But it certainly has meaning and purpose and affects all of us in profound ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it has to be big things or
Yeah.
big, grand. I think it really, I suspect it mostly comes down to the quality of your relationships,
Yeah.
and how we tend to those relationships or cultivate those relationships. I mean,
Mhm.
that is at least what I think I've referenced this study on here before, but that Harvard study that they did, that's like
Yeah.
the 100-year study, or if
Yep.
it's just shy of that. But
I think it's even more than that actually.
well,
now.
because the cohort was, so JFK was in the cohort of,
The original?
yeah. They don't like, I think because he's not alive, they maybe have like said
That's
that
so
he was in it. But,
interesting.
yeah, so it was these it was young men
Yeah.
at Harvard that they followed. But and then they have since like added family members and
Mhm.
whatnot. But really
And this was when Harvard was only men too.
correct. Yes, yes. And then they found like poor men.
Yeah. And they're only rich
And
men.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now there's women too, but
Yeah.
what they have found is, I mean, it's still an amazing data set to be able
Yeah.
to follow people over
Oh,
that
for
amount of time
sure.
and seek, give them questionnaires, and they have go through the things that we go through
Yeah.
in our lifespan. So those joys and those losses and those all of those different milestones, and sort of be able to gauge over the lifespan over these different experiences
Yeah.
what has been the most important. And for most people, it comes down to the quality, the number and the quality of their relationships,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is going back to what we were talking about the other day, which was the
Yeah.
loneliness epidemic.
Yes.
And why
people
that
working
is.
at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And even, I love back to that the Vivek Murthy, and what he describes as like this tear in the fabric of our communities.
Yeah.
And that um in whatever community we're in, whether that's a work community or a church community or a sports community or whatever it is, like we are all experiencing these tears, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we mend those?
Well, and speaking of mending those, if
Yeah.
the one of the things that he also he researches is the like psychological and physiological impact of forgiveness, which I thought is very interesting, and I would love to know more about that. I don't know
Mhm.
what your
Yeah, so I have lots to say about forgiveness and probably too much to say right here, but you can go to my Substack and read my article on the way forward forgiveness. But couple things. One, Archbishop Desmond Tutu says that there is no future without forgiveness. And I thought that was so interesting. Um, and for me, forgiveness, right, is a letting go. And the opposite of forgiveness is resentment. And, we have in the works a podcast about um, AA and addictions and 12 steps. And resentment is probably the biggest hindrance to freedom from addictions.
Oh, wow.
So when we think about an inability to forgive, we think it's really about keeping ourselves in bondage to this
Yeah,
sense of
it
like
is. It is.
anger and addiction
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
this anger.
Yeah. 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 The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of bind yourself up in that.
Yeah. Resentment can feel really good. It can feel empowering. And that's such a false sense of power. And it's really this forgiveness and this kind of self-emptying that, this is what I see in the ministry of Jesus is this idea that in letting go of all that and in not taking the choice and not making the choice to hold power over somebody, but in releasing them of that, you are actually releasing yourself of that. And, back to your idea of contentment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I suspect that the opposite approach will leave you with more discontent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's what keeps in so there's a verse in Matthew 6 where Jesus says, if you forgive others their sins, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you don't forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your sins. Which is pretty sounds pretty quid pro quo, right? You need to either forgive people, and if you forgive people, then God's going to forgive you. But if you don't, then God's not. And I don't think he's really saying that God's not going to forgive you. It's saying if you don't forgive other people, you're going to be bound up in this way that you're not going to allow transformation to happen in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you want to be transformed, you have to let go.
Yeah.
That's so many of our spiritual texts, whatever religion we're talking about, there are such rich psychological truths.
Oh my gosh.
That exist there. And I think that's one of them, right?
Yeah.
And and somebody can look at that and be like, well, what does that mean? That means that, God is an unforgiving God. No, it's just saying literally you are not going to allow you're kind of becoming hermetically sealed from any kind of transformative act to work upon your heart or your soul or your spirit to move you in any way.
Yeah.
Whereas, you let down that guard and you release that power and, possibility happens.
That's interesting. That's really good.
I'm curious what he might say.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
What his
research shows. Yeah.
Because it's so interesting to me that there are these social researchers who are researching things like forgiveness and
it's
gratitude.
amazing. Yeah. Well, so that was one of the I in one of the episodes he was talking about with his co-host that that's one of the criticisms sometimes that people get are sort of like, why are you spending the time on these positive emotions where there's the people that are suffering? Right. We should be studying the negative ones. And he's like, but we might want to give them tools.
We might want to give them tools. Also, maybe it's because, studying we can study resentment, but then what do we do?
Right. Exactly.
What's the antidote?
Which was making me think about, so in going back to that class that I was taking, the professor that taught the class was in a lot of the text in the course, was referencing the scholar that's from the University of Pennsylvania, named Martin Seligman, and
Yeah.
he wrote a book called Flourish. But they had us take, and he sort of goes in the book, at the beginning of the book, explains it's a PERMA model, is the way it's like PERMA. So, and which stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And it's like a test that you take. And so at the beginning of the class, they have us take this test. So it's this test, the PERMA test, and it's the authentic happiness or something like that test. And it's a score. And then you go through the course, and at the end of the course, you take the same test again, and to see, does learning tools, I mean, they're basically habits of mind or things that you can structure in your day that are habits.
Sure.
Does learning about the science of well-being change your score? Turns out it does, or it can. At least, I mean, I think that so once you take the course, then you're like in the pool of people that they'll reach back out to in the future and see, did some of it stick, so to speak, like, did learning about it at one point in your life end up changing that score over time. But it's certainly, like, when you're in it, is making you more attentive to paying attention to the right things. So, but the PERMA thing, so one of the 5, which he says, like, that's sort of, trying to discern well-being, and he likes to use the term well-being versus, like, happiness, because happiness sort of has, like, what is that? It's not as solid.
Yeah.
But
that.
is that meaning, right? Having meaning is only just one of the 5 things that sort of, like, help people have, like, well-being in their lives.
That's interesting. And the other things are, say those one more time.
So the first one is just positive emotion. And so I think that is kind of like that personality
right?
characteristic,
Yeah.
right? Engagement. Just like, I think how present you are, how maybe, like,
that awareness piece too.
Yeah. The relationships. So like, some of the questions are about, like, do you feel lonely or not? Like, how often do how often do you spend time with other people? Like, those, those sorts of questions. Meaning, and then the last one is accomplishments. And that one would sort of be like, do you usually, like, achieve the goals that you're working towards, and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, you can go online and take it for free, and it'll,
and it'll
you get
spit out
you
a
get
little score.
Yeah.
And tell you, and the score tells you that how great your life is.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just like where you are, like, gives you kind of a baseline, for
But
where you are.
Yeah. So here's as you were saying that, I think it's interesting. So learning, and you were saying, like, learning about well-being.
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, and we haven't really talked about, like, what I do as, like, a spiritual director, like, that I'm a spiritual director, which sounds real woo-woo, but I kind of, like, I basically, I'm kind of I'm not a therapist at all, but I kind of walk with people in a spiritual journey, like a one-on-one kind of thing. So a lot of people come to me and they're like, I want to have a more spiritual life, but I'm not particularly religious, or I was raised in this kind of church, but I don't really believe those things. So, but people are craving kind of a deeper, what they consider quote unquote, spiritual, life.
Yeah.
And probably, which means probably you can pour wine. That's fine. We can have the sounds of pouring wine. And so one of the first things I do is I ask them, like, what are your spiritual practices? Like, do you have a spiritual practice? And probably most of us, whether we consider ourselves religious or not, have spiritual practices.
Yeah.
But I would think those are kind of like these habits of mind or habits of well-being, things that we learn, that we do, that give us a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And are not necessarily just results oriented, but are, like you said, lead to contentment, lead to a deeper engagement
Yeah.
in the world, in nature, in our relationships. Um, so we're talking about
Yeah.
meditation. I mean, I tell most of my clients that, one of the biggest, most important spiritual practices we have is learning how to love our families well,
Yeah.
'cause sometimes that can be a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Especially in these days where there's so much, polarity. So how do we love people well?
Yeah.
And and that is a life of meaning.
Yeah.
And that is the distinguishment, right, between a life of meaning and a vocation of meaning, or a
Correct.
job
Correct.
that brings us meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that the course is structured, or how she structured the course, is like the first part of the class is like the ways is helping unpack the ways that your mind lies to you. And which I thought was quite good.
Yes.
And then
How does your mind lie to you, Erin?
like in all the ways. I mean, it does for all of us, right? But it's just
Yeah.
like
But specifically for you, Erin.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? Everything
Now I'm
is
pouring wine.
here, I was like too scared to actually pour any. So I was like, oh no. Okay. The
At the end of the day.
yeah, at the end of the day, right? I think what it reminds me of, which is the importance of the scientific method.
Of course it is.
Because everything is relative. Your reality is just relative to your own experience, right? And so everybody is just sort of walking around with their own like perception of whatever their reality is based on their own, experiences. And so
Do you think there's no like actual universal
truth? Well, that's why the scientific method is so important, because it's the closest thing you're going to get to that, right? Which is like, I have a large enough sample size. There's not just an N of one, because we're all just like these N's of one running around with our own perceptions. And then that you can sort of try to be like, okay, well, this seems to be collectively true, and is, you're trying to get other people to prove the same result. You're asking people to poke holes in your findings on purpose. And so, I mean, there's no better way to get to something that's close to true than that method.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to cut you off your thought, so I want you to finish your thought. But then I'm gonna.
I think that. Yeah. So the first part is like, how does your mind lie to you, right? And then the second part is like the tools for well-being, right? To like and she's got like a whole list of like, you can pick from these things, and you get to pick one to practice like over several weeks.
Yeah. So what did you practice?
Savoring.
Oh, good.
It's such a good one.
Yeah.
And so to do it, like how you're supposed to do it, is when you're in the moment, like having this positive experience that you're like, this is really great.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be like, hey, like, this is really great. Like, say it out loud to someone else.
Yeah. And like, and you're supposed to, I think it's at least 13 seconds or something, or there's some amount of time that you're supposed to stay in it.
So she also described like she's like also almost like have a bird's eye view of yourself, like having this experience.
The inner observer.
Yeah. And then just, communicating it out loud, and then sort of just being like how lucky am I that I'm getting to have this experience right now. And so when you kind of like grind into that, it gives it more weight.
Yes.
And the more attention that you give to those sorts of moments, like, of course it's your day. You're like, man, my day was great. Right. Because you're like focusing so much attention on like moments that give you joy.
Which is absolutely that scientific, that idea that negative experiences stick like,
you perceive them so much more intensely,
and so they stick to us, right? Like,
what's designed for survival, which means like any rustle in the bushes, we better be like, that is a lion.
That is a lion coming to get me in Forest Park.
Yeah.
But what is that thing that that you Velcro. Yeah, it's like Velcro, right?
Yeah.
But then any positive experience is like Teflon, and like we forget it in a second.
Yep,
It's just
yep.
like gone.
Yeah.
And so savoring.
So savoring gratitude was
Mhm.
one. So like people do gratitude journals, but then so Martin Seigelman, she got this from his book because I started reading his book, but he with his students at the University of Pennsylvania would be like, I want you to pick somebody in your life that has made a difference in your life, and you're
Yeah.
just gonna write them a letter.
Mhm.
I think he gave a word count, right? It has to be 400 words or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. But then he's like, you're going to contact this person and say, I would like to meet with you,
Yeah.
and not tell them like why. And then when you go to meet with them, you're going to be like, I have written you this letter, and you are going to read it out loud to them.
Oh wow.
And then he's like, and then it's like, congratulations, your life is now better for the next 3 months or something. Because like that's what his studies showed. Like if you just did this one single practice, like you would see a significant improvement for like a couple of months after
for the person who actually communicated the
Yes.
gratitude.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And I wonder.
I'm sure it impacts the receiver as well.
Of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Well, you know what that makes me think about, Erin? On my way here tonight, I grabbed my Adam Grant Think Again book,
Oh
which you gave me as part of like a book group.
yeah.
And I pulled out my bookmark, and on the back you had written, do you remember?
Yeah.
You wrote for Kelley, one of my favorite thinking partners and all around best friends. Love you,
Yeah.
Erin. And I read that, and I'm like, I need to put this in a special place.
Aw.
So yeah, I mean, those moments of gratitude, and when we say out loud the things we feel for one another,
Yeah.
those are transformational moments.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's the sign off, is to just tell somebody that you care about them,
Yeah.
because you'll feel better, and so will they.
And so will they, over and over.
Yeah.
And write it down so they can find it
Yeah,
later.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah.
So join us next time, and we will be back with Professor Patrick Hill.
As always, thank you to our audience for investing your time and listening to us. Please subscribe, leave some feedback, and rate our podcast. Most importantly, share it with a friend. Our show will only grow because of you. If you have any show suggestions, questions, or thoughts on the show, feel free to write us at atheist@stlpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell and Trend Media STL. You can follow us and other great podcasts on Instagram at STL Podcasts. Also, check out the show notes for links to our Substacks. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.